Thank you again, Mr. Radabaugh, and good afternoon again to everyone. Appreciated the first message today. Figured that with it being such a unique opportunity to meet twice on the Passover, that's a pretty amazing opportunity, because I think if you were to think of Passover, if you're like me, what do you think of? I think of what we did last night. I think of the service. I think of foot washing. I think of the new symbols. That's when somebody says Passover, that's what I think of. But outside of the 1.5, 2 hours of time that we're there, that we're cleaning up, did you know there's actually another 22 hours left in Passover? It's an entire day. Now, we in our Western society, we look at days from it changes over in the middle of the night when we're sleeping or trying to sleep or something like that. But the way that God was working and the way He set things up from sunset to sunset, you started it that way in the evening, and then the day went on and it carried through until the sun went down on the next night. Until the sun goes down tonight, we are still here in Passover. So I want to take the opportunity today to look at the Passover. I want to look at not just what we did last night. Actually, I won't say not just. I want to look at what happens after the symbols is what we're going to look at. We're going to look at that both in Egypt as well as in the time of Christ, and then we'll finish off by asking what does that mean for us for the beyond the Passover symbols. Because we already did that service, we already took the bread, we took the wine, we did the foot washing, so we did all the symbols of Passover, and yet we are still here in the day. So let's go ahead. We're going to do we're going to be in Scripture quite a bit, but thankfully it's not going to be in a whole lot of various places. We're either going to be in Exodus or we're going to be in the Gospels. So let's go back to Exodus chapter 12 to start things off here. We're going to look at what else the children of Israel did on the Passover day. Again, we know that it started sundown on the 14th, which is the start of the day. God is inclusive there, again, with how He counts things. Exodus chapter 12, verse 3. Exodus chapter 12, verse 3. We see Moses is told, he says, "Speak to the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month every man shall take for himself a lamb according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of the persons. According to each man's need, you shall make your count for the lamb." So what do we get from this? They were in their house all together as a family that evening. And if they happen to have a smaller family or have a really big lamb, you might have your neighbor or some other people come over that you were sharing that entire time with. So they were together, which again is something that's so special for us this year, is that we not only got to get together last night, but a few short hours later, we're together again here in the Sabbath that is the Passover. Exodus chapter 12, verse 11, a little bit further down. Speaking of the lamb, there are directions given for how to take that lamb. It says, "Thus you shall eat it with a belt on your waist, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. So you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover." Also in verse 22, it says, "You shall take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike it on the lintel and the two doorposts with the blood that is in the basin. And none of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning." So not only were they all together, but they're dressed, prepared to go, but they're not going anywhere. So they're all dressed up with nowhere to go, sort of thing. But they're there, they're ready. If you've ever had a meal, and I will admit to there being Passovers where my wife and I are running out the door. We're like, how do we even get a meal before we got? Because you just have to get there, you have to set up. And sometimes in the flurry of things, it's just, there's haste. And so unwittingly in that way, not on purpose, we're kind of following this directive to have the meal in haste. But there's a mindset that is there. Eat it in haste. Be ready to go. You're not going anywhere. Don't go out of the house yet. I'll let you know when you can go out. And that's in the morning, right? So that would have been this morning at daybreak. They were able to then go out of the house. But they're together with everyone. And they're to have, again, their belt on their waist, their staff in their hand, their sandals on their feet. And if you've ever probably consider here, maybe for us a more appropriate parallel might be how you feel before you're getting ready to go to the feast. You ever have a caravan where if you ever caravan with another group, and maybe this might be going back a few years, but when you weren't sure your car was going to make it, people would drive together so that you could make sure that somebody could go get help. And so you'd have a couple families driving together. So you'd have a little bit more of a caravan going on. And when you put the kids from two families together, when they're anxious about going somewhere, they know they're going to go. There's a different energy in the house. So perhaps it was like that here for them on the Exodus, even though they're to be mindful of what they're doing. They're supposed to stay indoors, but they're together, either just a single household, or depending on the size of the household or the size of the lamb, there's a possibility that they are also coming together. Another thing, that after the symbols of the Passover were taken, after the lamb is eaten, verse 10 here in Exodus 12, we read that it says, "You shall let none of it," speaking of the lamb, "remain until morning, and what remains of it until morning you shall burn with fire." So last night after the Passover service, I went home and I started a fire in the fire pit outside to take care of the remains of what was left for our Passover service here. And they were also instructed, they said, God tells them, don't let anything remain. If there is something that remains, burn it with fire. And so once they're finally allowed to go out, they can burn that with fire. If they're burning that, if it remains until morning, right, they can do that outside, they can do it inside in the home, but they have to dispose of the final bits of the Passover lamb. A few other things that occurred here after the actual Passover symbols, but still on the day of Passover here, Exodus chapter 12, verse 33. Exodus 12, verse 33. They've already started to gather, the Israelites have already started to gather their things, because Moses and Aaron were told by Pharaoh, it says, get out. But obviously, they're not allowed to get out because you have to stay in your home until morning. But in verse 33, the Egyptians urged the people that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, we shall all be dead. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, having their kneading bowls bound up in their clothes, on their shoulders. And then the children of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, and they had asked from the Egyptians articles of silver, articles of gold, and clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they granted them what they requested. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. I think there have been a number of messages that have talked about the Israelites plundering the Egyptians and being given so many wonderful things. And you can see it because in the offerings that are given later on in the building of the temple, the building of the tabernacle, and the things, the different pieces of equipment that were used there in worship to God, people donated, people gave an offering willingly, and it was in abundance. But we see here that not only did they plunder the Egyptians in that way, but they were also packing up their houses. They're binding up their kneading bowls and anything that you had. I mean, there are times where we've gone out of the house and we're like, okay, we're going to be gone for this long. What's going to keep? What do we have to take with us? What are we just throwing out? How are we going to manage this? Well, they're like, well, I don't have time to let the bread rise. We're going to pack it up. Everything's bound up. You're utilizing space. You know, if you've ever moved somebody, or if you ever had a big family, you're trying to get them all into the car to go to the feast, you find the person who's got the most spatial awareness, and you have them pack it for you, right? And so they're like binding everything up in their clothes, kneading bowls, and they're getting ready to go. Another thing that happened on the Passover day is found in Exodus chapter 13, verse 19. Exodus chapter 13, verse 19. Again, while the children of Israel are getting ready to go, packing their things up, also plundering the Egyptians on their way, because they're all trying to meet over at Ramses. But in Exodus chapter 13, verse 19, we see here that Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had placed the children of Israel under solemn oath, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here with you. And so he had to get those in order to be able to take them out when they left from Ramses towards Succoth. Right? We know that they left from Ramses on the 15th, right? Which is one of those things that we remember, God taking them on that journey out of Egypt. And so there were a number of things that are going on for the Israelites on the day of Pentecost, day of Passover. On Passover, the daylight portion of Passover, not just up at night, not just being ready to go, but there's a lot going on there. If we move forward in time to the Passover with Jesus Christ and his disciples, there's quite a bit that goes on. So let's turn to the Gospels in John chapter 13. Again, last night we covered the symbols, the bread, the wine. We also read quite a bit in John regarding what Jesus went through, as far as his prayers, as far as the teachings that he went through, that he went over with his disciples. But in John chapter 13, verse 31, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and glorify him immediately. Little children, I shall be with you a little while longer. You will seek me, and as I said to the Jews, where I am going, you cannot come. So now I say to you, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. And by this all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." So after he's given them the symbols of the Passover, this is still in the evening, right? But what did he do? He starts teaching them and instructing them what they ought to do. Give a new commandment. You can read through, again, we did much of this reading last night, but chapter 14, 15, and 16 are all teachings of Jesus Christ, things that he wanted to make sure that he would convey to his disciples, because he knew that his time was at hand. He knew he was going to be dying. What do you tell somebody? You know, there's an entire industry around making sure that you have your will, your last will and testament out there, so people will know what you would like them to do when you're gone. And what Jesus is conveying here is, in essence, that last will and testament. This is what I want you to do. This is how I want you to think. This is how I want you to continue to grow. You've taken these symbols, and here's how I want you to essentially define them. He told them, you don't know what I'm doing now. The Spirit will bring that about, bring it to remembrance later on, and you're gonna have a little bit better understanding. And so chapters 14, 15, and 16, he's teaching his disciples. He's taken the time to instill in them. And you think about this in parallel with what was happening in Egypt at the time of the Israelites, right? They're there, they eat the Passover, and then they're being told to make ready, get prepared for the journey. It's the same exact thing that Jesus Christ was doing for his disciples. He's getting ready to send them out into unknown territory. They don't know what it's going to be like. He says, the world's going to hate you because it hated me first. Here's this new commandment. I want you to understand this. Here's how I want you to behave. These are all the things. I have faith that my Father has set this all in place. And this is what he's teaching them, because he's preparing them for that journey. The journey of being disciples, of being the apostles who would be there as the foundation for the church that he was building. John chapter 17. We'll read this in concert with another section in the Gospels, but let's read John chapter 17. Jesus spoke these words, lifted up his eyes to heaven, and said, "Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that your Son may also glorify you. As you have given him authority over all flesh, that he should give eternal life to as many as you have given him. And this is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom you have sent. I have glorified you on the earth. I have finished the work which you have given me to do. And now, O Father, glorify me together with yourself with the glory which I had with you before the world was." He's praying, he's asking God to help him through the difficult time that he has ahead. Let's go to Matthew chapter 26. If you want to keep a marker, we'll be back in John 17. But let's go to Matthew chapter 26. Matthew chapter 26, verse 36. Probably should have read this verse beforehand, but Jesus and his disciples had gone to the Garden of Gethsemane, and he had said to the disciples, "Sit here while I go and pray over there." And then he goes and he says the words that we just read in John 17. He took with him there Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, James and John. He began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. And he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me." He went a little farther and fell on his face and prayed, "O Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping, and said to Peter, "What, could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." So he brings him to the garden. He goes off and he prays. And let's go back to John 17. Keep your marker here in Matthew 26, but in John 17, verse 6, he now prays for his disciples. He says, "I have manifested your name to the men whom you have given me out of the world. They were yours. You gave them to me, and they have kept your word. Now they have known that all things which you have given me are from you, for I have given to them the words which you have given me, and they have received them, and have surely known that I came forth from you, and they have believed that you sent me. I pray for them. I do not pray for the world, but for those whom you have given me." Can you imagine praying this right after they just left you hanging? You're supposed to be here with me, and yet you fell asleep. And then he goes back and he's praying for them. Verse 9, "So I pray for them. I do not pray for the world, but for those whom you have given me, for they are yours, and all mine are yours, and yours are mine, and I am glorified in them. Now I am no longer in the world, but these are in the world, and I come to you, Holy Father. Keep them through your name, those whom you have given me, that they may be one as we are. While I was with them in the world, I kept them in your name. Those whom you gave me I have kept. And none of them is lost except the son of perdition, that the scripture might be fulfilled. But now I come to you, and these things I speak in the world, that they may have my joy fulfilled in them." And he goes on, he's praying for his disciples. But if you go back to Matthew chapter 26, if your marker is still there, Matthew chapter 26, verse 42, again a second time he went away and prayed, saying, "O my Father, if this cup cannot pass away from me unless I drink it, your will be done." And he came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. So he left them and he went away and prayed a third time. And you can read again some of that prayer there in John 17. So he let them sleep that third time. Then he came to his disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." When you think about what just happened there, and you think about what the commandment was for the children of Israel when they were in Egypt, he says, "I want you to eat these symbols, eat the lamb, be dressed and ready to go." And they were there to, again, be mindful of the call of Moses, the things that were going to happen as they were preparing to go out of the land. But Jesus here, in like manner with his disciples, they've taken the symbols, they've had that Passover, and now he's having them, as he's prepped and ready to go, and he's trying to prepare them, not only with what he's teaching them, but also spiritually in the mindset, and yet they fall asleep. Matthew 26, verse 47, we read here, "While he was still speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, with a great multitude with swords and clubs, came from the chief priests and the elders of the people. And he is the one. Now his betrayer had given them a sign, saying, 'Whomever I kiss, he is the one. Seize him.' And so immediately he went up to Jesus and said, 'Greetings, Rabbi,' and kissed him. And Jesus said to him, 'Friend, why have you come?' Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and took him." So carrying on farther in this timeline here of the Passover with Jesus, not just the symbols of it, but he has gone from teaching his disciples to having some time with his Father and praying, not only for himself, but for those who are there with him and for those who are going to be coming. He is then betrayed and arrested. Luke chapter 22. Luke chapter 22, verse 54. Luke chapter 22, verse 54. After his arrest, we know that Peter followed at a distance. Luke chapter 22, verse 54. They arrested him, they led him and brought him into the high priest's house, but Peter followed at a distance. Again, he had been one of the three who was there with him in the garden. Now when they had kindled a fire in the midst of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. And a certain servant girl, seeing him as he sat by the fire, looked intently at him and said, "This man was also with him." But he denied him, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." And after a little while another saw him and said, You also are of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." Then after about an hour had passed, another confidently affirmed, saying, "Surely this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are saying." And immediately while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him before the rooster crows, "You will deny me 3 times." And so Peter went out and wept bitterly. So again, Jesus Christ, he had warned Peter. He said, Satan has asked for you to sift you. And he said, when you return to me, take care of my sheep. Feed them. Strengthen people. But Peter here denies Jesus. A little bit later on in verse 63 here of Luke 22, after Jesus is denied by Peter and he knows it, and their eyes meet, then the men who held Jesus mocked him and beat him, and having blindfolded him, they struck him on the face and asked him, saying, "Prophesy, who is the one who struck you?" And many other things they blasphemously spoke against him. So throughout the day, Passover day, evening as well as into the morning hours, Jesus Christ is mocked multiple times. He's beaten. We'll see actually if we go to verse 66 here, everything that happened there with Peter's denial, with his arrest, as well as this initial mocking, is happening during the evening hours. Verse 66, as soon as it was day, the elders of the people, both chief priests and scribes, came together and led him into their council, saying, "If you are the Christ, tell us." But he said to them, "If I tell you, you will by no means believe me. And if I also ask you, you will by no means answer me or let me go. Hereafter the Son of Man will sit on the right hand of the power of God." And they all said, "Are you then the Son of God?" So he said to them, "You rightly say that I am." And they said, "What further testimony do we need? For we have heard it ourselves from his own mouth." You can correlate this back with Matthew chapter 26. Turn to Matthew 26, verse 59. This same council, a little bit more of a circus, but Matthew chapter 26, verse 59, the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death. So they asked Jesus some things. They're trying to get him to say something that they can catch him on. But they also sought false testimony against him to put him to death, but found none. Even though many false witnesses came forward, they found none. But at last 2 false witnesses came forward and said, "This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days." And the high priest arose and said to him, "Do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you?" But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest answered and said to him, "I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." And Jesus said to him, "It is as you said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven." And so it's not only that they are trying to put on airs about, this is an actual trial, we're doing this right. What had they done all evening? They're mocking him, they're telling him to prophesy, and treating him not in a legal fashion, not in a legal manner, and then they open it up. It's morning, it's daybreak, it's time to have the hearing, and they're seeking out false witnesses. And we know what do not bear false witness. What is it? Then you're supposed to have the punishment that was given to the individual. In this case, death. But that's actively what they were seeking out. And so this is all occurring now. Now we're moving into the daylight portion of the day of Passover. John chapter 18, verse 28. John 18, verse 28. After the high priests feel that they've got a pretty good conviction. They've got grounds to do something. They bring him over to Pilate. John 18, verse 28, they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium, and it was early morning. But they themselves did not go into the praetorium, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. What kind of a irony is that, I guess? They're willing to sit here, consider putting an individual to death on false pretenses, but they're like, oh, no, we can't go in there, we'll be defiled. We want to be able to take the Passover. Because the Jews did the Passover on the 15th. So they don't go in. Verse 29, Pilate then went out to them and said, what accusation do you bring against this man? They answered and said to him, if he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you. Then Pilate said to him, you take him and judge him according to your law. Therefore the Jews said to him, it is not lawful for us to put anyone to death, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by which death he would die. Then Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus, and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus answered him, are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me? So much of the responses that Christ gives are just, they cut right to the heart of the matter. Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Your own nation, the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so that I should not be delivered to the Jews, but now my kingdom is not from here. Pilate therefore said to him, are you a king? Jesus answered, you say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into this world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Pilate says to him, what is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, I find no fault in him at all. But you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Do you therefore want me to release to you the king of the Jews? And they cried again, saying, not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. So Jesus goes before Pilate. The Jews deny him yet again. They would rather have a robber, a convicted robber, a known robber released, as opposed to someone who they had drummed up false accusations against. Matthew chapter 27. Matthew 27, verse 27. So Pilate tries to hand Jesus back to the Jews. That doesn't happen. So Matthew chapter 27, verse 27. So the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole garrison around him. So he goes back in. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and when they had twisted a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and a reed in his right hand. And they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! Then they spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they took the robe off him, put his own clothes on him, and led him away to be crucified. This is the second time then he's beaten, he's mocked, and he again just accepted that willingly because of what it meant for us today and for all those who have ever been called or who will be called in the future. John chapter 19. John 19, verse 5. So when Jesus comes out after that mocking, scourging, and beating, he's wearing a crown of thorns and a purple robe, and Pilate said to them, Behold the man. Therefore when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him! Crucify him! Pilate said to them, You take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him. The Jews answered him, We have a law, and according to our law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God. Therefore, when Pilate heard that saying, he was the more afraid. You see, at that time, actually starting with Julius Caesar said that he was a deity, he was a god, and so his son Octavius, who became Augustus, was known as the Son of God, and they would play a little bit of wordplay within the Greek. They wouldn't really call him a full-on Son of God. They would say Son of God, little g, but when they shortened it, it became, I believe it was DF, Dies Filius or something like that, or Dies Filia. I apologize. Didn't write that down in my notes. But so he would, whether you were saying Son of God, where it was capital S, capital G, or lowercase s, lowercase g, they both started, the initials for both of them in Greek are DF. So what they would do is, he would allow the ambiguity to be there. So he would sign something, or when they had coinage, it would say DF on it. So people could decide how they wanted to see him, but as a small little son of the little god Caesar, or son of God. And so these things here, they grow over time. And that was back in, I think it was like 40 BC, and it is, and all of the Caesars after that essentially took the moniker there as Son of God. So the Jews tell Pilate that he made himself the Son of God. Verse 8, therefore when Pilate heard that saying, he was the more afraid, and went into the praetorium and said to Jesus, where are you from? But Jesus gave him no answer. At the end of this, Pilate ends up conceding to have him crucified. In verse 16, he delivered Jesus to them to be crucified. So they took Jesus and led him away. Let's go to Mark chapter 15. Actually, before that, let's read 17 through 19 here in John. And Christ, bearing his cross, went into a place called the place of a skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha, where they crucified him, and the two others with him, one on either side, and Jesus in the center. Now Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and the writing was, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. And many of the Jews read this title, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. And it actually bothered the chief priests of the Jews. They said to Pilate, do not write the King of the Jews. But he said, I am the King of the Jews. And Pilate answered, what I have written. So they didn't like that title on there, because then now it's linked to them. They just wanted him to be dead. But now let's go back to Matthew chapter 27, verse 27. Matthew 27, verse 27. This is all going on during the daylight portion of Passover. Matthew chapter 27, verse 27. Now the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole garrison around him. I went on the wrong. I'm in Matthew. We want to go to Mark 15:21. I said the wrong scripture, I'm sorry. Mark 15, verse 21. Mark chapter 15, verse 21. So then they compelled a certain man, Simon, a Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus, as he was coming out of the country and passing by, to bear his cross. And they brought him to the place Golgotha, which is translated place of a skull. Then they gave him wine mingled with myrrh to drink, but he did not take it. And when they crucified him, they divided his garments, casting lots for them to determine what every man should take. Now it was a third hour. And they crucified him. And in the inscription of his accusation was written above. At third hour there, it'd be somewhere around, it's third hour of the day, so you go from sunrise and you count 3 hours. It was the third hour, and they crucified him, so around 9 o'clock, somewhere around there. And the inscription of his accusation was written above, the King of the Jews. With him they also crucified 2 robbers, one on his right and the other on his left. So the scripture was fulfilled which says, and he was numbered with the transgressors. And those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads and saying, Ah, you who destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross. Likewise the chief priests also, mocking among themselves with the scribes, said, He saved others, himself he cannot save. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, descend now from the cross, that we may see and believe. Even those who were crucified with him reviled him. And he's again going through the mocking, going through the blasphemous comments. People see fit to go ahead and throw his direction. Verse 33. Actually, let's go to Matthew chapter 27. Now we go to Matthew 27, verse 45. Matthew 27, verse 45. Now from the 6th hour until the 9th hour, there was darkness over all the land. So now we're looking at from around noon until around 3. From the 6th hour until the 9th hour, there was darkness over all the land. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, that is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Some of those who stood there, when they heard that, said, this man is calling for Elijah. And immediately one of them ran and took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put it on a reed, and offered it to him to drink. The rest said, let him alone. Let us see if Elijah will come to save him. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. Then behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth quaked, and the rocks were split. And the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. So when the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and the things that had happened, they feared greatly, saying, truly, this was the Son of God. And many women who followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him, were there looking on from afar, among whom were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. So he dies on the cross somewhere around 3 in the afternoon, which for us would have been about 40 minutes ago. When you consider everything that happened on the Passover day, again, it's been mentioned, it's not often that we actually get to spend this much time of Passover together. And to consider what he went through, to consider what the Israelites in Egypt went through, I think is very important. And more also happened. Let's go back to John, look at chapter 19. Pick it up in verse 38, John 19, verse 38. After he died, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, for fear of the Jews, because Joseph of Arimathea was actually a member of the council, so in secret, for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus. And Pilate gave him permission, so he came and took the body of Jesus. And Nicodemus, who at first came to Jesus by night, also came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds. Then they took the body of Jesus and bound it in strips of linen with the spices, as the custom of the Jews is to bury. Now in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid. So they laid Jesus because of the Jews' preparation day, for the tomb was nearby. That preparation day, looking forward to the first holy day, the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Let's go to Luke 23, verse 50. Luke 23, verse 50, we'll see here, again, speaking of Joseph of Arimathea, a council member, a good and just man, he had not consented to their decision. Indeed, he was from Arimathea, a city of the Jews, who himself was also waiting for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus, and he took it down, wrapped it in linen, and laid it in a tomb that was hewn out of the rock, where no one had ever lain before. That day was a preparation day, and the Sabbath drew near. And the women who had come with him from Galilee followed after, and they observed the tomb and how his body was. Then they returned and prepared spices and fragrant oils, and they rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment. So we see that right up until the beginning of the Sabbath, at sunset, so much is occurring. So much is happening. But why did I want to take all the time to go over these 2 days? That for the children of Israel coming out of Egypt, that for our Savior on the day that he was crucified after the Passover service with his disciples. So for us, when we consider our life and our actions after taking the Passover symbols, I have 2 questions that I would like to leave us with. The first can be found in Matthew chapter 25. Let's go to Matthew chapter 25. Start in verse 1. Then the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight a cry was heard, Behold, the bridegroom is coming, go out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the wise answered, saying, No, lest there should be not enough for us and you, but go rather to those who sell and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterward the other virgins came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered and said, Assuredly, I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming. This is such an intriguing parable when you consider it in conjunction with the Passover. For the Israelites in Egypt, they were told to be ready to go. Take the Passover, eat the symbols, eat the lamb, be ready to go. Were they paying attention enough to know when Moses was coming or when he was going to call? They weren't allowed to leave their house until morning. But you know, how many of us get up bright and early after you have a big meal and you have a bunch of people over? It's kind of nice. The dishes are still going to be there, you know. They're not going anywhere. You take a little bit of extra time. I mean, the very night of Passover, Jesus and his disciples, they have the meal. He goes out to go pray in the garden, and they can't even stay up for an hour. He said, it was only an hour. Why are you sleeping? See, all these people, they had the blood on the doorposts in Egypt. They were there with Jesus Christ. So the question I have is, are we sleeping? Because we can have the oil, we can have the understanding, we can have taken the Passover, and yet still be found wanting. Jesus told his disciples, Peter, James, and John, he said, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Here in Matthew 25, the parable of the virgins, one could almost say the flesh is willing, but the spirit in them is weak. They haven't filled up their lamps. They don't have enough. The spirit is being quenched. Again, we can be here, we can take the Passover, we can go through the service, and that is the only thought we actually give to Passover. But so much happened on that day. I think it's important for us to ask ourselves again, are we sleeping? Second question, let's go to Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10. Verse 32. Matthew chapter 10, verse 32. It says, Therefore, whoever confesses me before men, him I will also confess before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, him I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. See, one of the other things that happened on the day of Passover, Jesus Christ was denied so many times. Not only by the Jews who didn't like him, but also by his disciples. We have a record of Peter being there and denying him 3 times, but we don't have record of anyone else being around. We do know that the ladies followed at a distance. They did watch. There are some other individuals who did as well, but coming to his defense, not a one. Not a one. Mark chapter 8. Mark chapter 8, verse 34. Mark chapter 8, verse 34. Jesus speaking here says, when he called the people to himself, with his disciples also, he said to them, Whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. And yet we watched Peter deny Jesus Christ. So the question for us today, are we denying Jesus Christ? Because you can still be an apostle. We can be sifted by Satan. We can be the Jews who are there who see and just want him to keep showing us, oh, I know you're there, but just keep showing me a sign. If you can bring yourself down from the cross, then we'll believe. If you can make more bread, then we'll believe. If you can do this, then we'll believe. Are we denying Jesus Christ? Are we unwilling to confess him before men? Are we unwilling to take up the cross and bear what we have all agreed to bear at baptism? Is that something that we're looking down the road at and we're saying, hey, this is a decision, this is a choice that I need to make? Or are we trying to shirk our responsibility and duty just because we don't want the penalty that comes along with it? It is something that God expects of us. See, all the children of Israel, when they were in Egypt, the choice was leave with Moses, stay and be slaves. Leave with Moses, stay and be slaves. And people are all like, I think I know the answer to this one. I would like to leave. Now, how long did that last? Not very long. They get out there and you got bitter water. They're like, oh, you're horrible. And then they run out of the stores of the food that they brought, all that bread that they put up on their kneading bowls and everything else. They run out of their stores. They're like, you came out here to kill us. We remember the meat pots and all this great stuff in Egypt. And they turned so quickly. The Jews at the time of Jesus Christ in the same way. How many times did they mock him and beat him and just deny him? They went out of their way to find false witnesses to deny who he was because they didn't want to admit that. It is easy for us to do that. Now, we might not be sitting there going like, well, if he was actually here, and then I could know who I have to not do these sorts of things to. But what does Jesus Christ say? He says, inasmuch as you've done it to the least of these, my brethren, you've done it to me. Do we deny him? Are we sleeping? A lot of the attention surrounding the Passover, and it's not that I'm saying we shouldn't focus on it, but a lot of the attention is surrounding the service at the beginning of the 14th. But so much occurred after that. Lessons. Everything that Jesus Christ taught, what we read at the end of our Passover service, that was all after the symbols. And it's vital information, vital teaching for us to instill and make sure that we have in our minds, at the forefront of our minds, so that when we sleep, we're going to wake up with a full lamp. So that when we're in a predicament where we're not sure or we're scared, we have enough strength that we rely on him and don't deny him. Let's make sure that we don't miss the opportunity to learn these lessons beyond the Passover symbols.